brother leading our next session really needs no introduction to most of us. We have counted Jim Adams as one of our most esteemed elder statesmen of foreign missions. I spoke with someone recently who was involved in Latin America Ministries, and I said, Jim Adams, everybody in Latin America Ministries knows Jim Adams, and this brother didn't, but he should, and he will, and he does now. But we are so delighted to get to hear of what Jim and his son David are involved in doing in their work throughout Latin America, and particularly having Jorge Molina here from Carlos Paz in Argentina. Is that how you say it? Okay, all right. I'm not much on Spanish. Anyway, come, dear brother.
It is given to us to pray for Latin America, I believe, in a special way this day. As we think of what's happening, I think, in many places of the world, one of the things that's happening in Latin America is, I believe there is reformation coming, and there's an open door for a great work in the churches that are there. We certainly want to see new churches formed and new churches planted. But the reality of what's taken place over the last 40 years is, I believe, an open door for reformation to take place. 1970, the facts given by The Economist magazine not too long ago, speaking of a great demographic religious change in all of Latin America. 1970, there was 92% given as Roman Catholic. 2010, we are now at 68%. It's a huge change that's been taking place. And so it opens the door for us to be taking the gospel to many of these people. And in the churches that have been formed in these years, the charismatics, the Pentecostals have been out into these places, and they have formed churches. And we can criticize the fanaticism, and they're wrong theologically in all these areas, but somehow or another, God has used these crooked sticks to strike straight blows. And so there is that Reformation opportunity, open door right now. And so part of what we have been seeing in these days is just recently, in fact, we were along the northern border of Mexico, and from really the Tijuana, where Jim Neuheiser and others have been going on a regular basis, all the way across Algodones or Mexicali, Algodones, San Luis, and then really all the way over. I think there's been that working Ciudad Juarez there, where Dave Hendricks is, and the work that's going on in all these different places. It's amazing how many of these churches now are in the doctrines of grace. We have a conference that'll be in 2 weeks in Hermosillo, and we'll have already, I think there's 80 who are signed up for the conference, pastors and students, about 20 students from a Baptist seminary that's in that process of reformation. And so I would just encourage you to be in prayer, and we need more people who will be involved in these opportunities, these open doors. And so I would just ask you to be in prayer for these things this afternoon and these days that follow. If we could show the slides, I think, concerning Mexico and Paco Orozco. Paco Orozco, hopefully you can just flash those up and we can keep them moving. I don't think I can quite duplicate Steve Graham's working here. He was quite a feat to get those to go forward there. Do we have some of those? Hermosillo, Mexico, Paco Orozco, just to say a quick word. This is their church off in a distance, a church that really in an amazing way has been an indigenous church right from the beginning, and how God brought Paco Orozco there under really persecution in different ways, and how that church began in his father's home and now has, I would say, 200 plus people in that congregation. He has something like 8,000 to 9,000 hits on his sermons every week. Now, I don't even understand that. We get excited when we hear people listening to our sermons sometimes, but that's pretty amazing. Paco is a powerful preacher, and we're very thankful for what's going on there. There's Paco, and there's his family. So just as a quick, one of his sons was given a full scholarship by the Gates Foundation. They homeschool their children, and God's been blessing that work there in a wonderful way. And there's just a whole lot of interactions in the city with his father being, having been the architect for the state of Sonora for many different years, depending on who's who's the governor of the state, but he has been many times. And they've had a beautiful outreach, even through the death of his son that some of you remember, Paquito, and how hundreds turned out for that funeral, and how there's been a witness through the years that's been powerful there. But that extension that they have to these other churches is really coming alive right now. And there's one of the conferences that we had, I think that's maybe 2 years ago, and their church building there that, by the way, we were able to be involved with that, but it really was they put up the building and there was help coming from different places, but it really was a beautiful way that they worked together. They found the property. It's kind of an out-of-the-way place. I don't even know how you find it if you didn't have some instruction. But people are constantly coming in there, so it's a great work that's going on there. What I'd like to do now, just to think of how there is that work in the northern Mexico all the way. We have contact with about 60 churches in the southern part of Chile and all the way down to Punta Arenas, which is almost the end of the world. It's way down there. But there's also the beauty of the work that's there in the Southern Cone. And we'll talk a little bit and have a video from Sam Masters tomorrow afternoon. But we have the privilege of having Jorge and Vilma. Where is Vilma? She was trying to escape. There, can you stand up maybe so they can all see you there? Come on. There she is. We're very thankful that she came. She has gone through chemo and radiation and all these different things that accompany the battle with cancer. So we are praying for God's healing of her and bringing her through this difficult time, and we're so glad you're here and thankful for God's work. But we would like to ask now if Jorge Molina would come up, and our son David will translate, and he can give some greetings. If you remember, Bob Self really organized and pushed forward a trip to go down there. I believe it was 1999, long ago in a faraway galaxy somewhere. We went together, the three of us, Don Donnell and Bob and myself, to kind of explore what possibilities, and then through some very difficult times for the church and violence and different things that took place. And after Don Donnell's leaving there, work in Carlos Paz has come with that privilege of having Jorge Molina as the pastor there and really seeking to disciple and care for those people there. So if Jorge would come and give a greeting and a few words, and then we'll have some slides on Carlos Paz.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Carlos Paz es una ciudad muy turística y difícil.
Carlos Paz is a very touristy city, and it's a very difficult city.
En este momento tenemos dos frentes de batalla inesperados.
At this moment, we have really two battlefronts that we weren't expecting.
Por un lado, el resurgimiento descontrolado del catolicismo romano.
On one side, we've seen a real growth and a resurgence of Roman Catholicism.
Y esto no es un motivo religioso, sino un fanatismo.
And it's not really a religious thing as much as a fanatical type thing.
Porque el Papa escogido es de Argentina.
Because the current Pope is an Argentine.
La gente escucha y sigue todo lo que el Papa dice y es para ellos lo máximo, palabra santa.
The people listen to everything this Pope says, and for them it's like holy words. It's like magic words.
Por otro lado, como acá y como en todo el mundo, el Evangelio de la prosperidad, la sanidad y el milagro.
On another religious side, we're seeing a lot of prosperity gospel and people just going after the name it and claim it and miracle working.
Esto fue un impacto para la doctrina de la reforma, la doctrina de la gracia que nosotros propugnamos, predicamos.
And so both of these things have kind of been like an impact on the Reformed doctrine that we are preaching.
Pero nos estamos levantando.
But we are raising up, and we're raising up against this.
La iglesia ha sufrido algunos problemas de deserción, pero también mantiene la base de los miembros que por momentos se eleva y por momentos por trabajo de la temporada baja.
So the church has suffered through some desertions, but it also has the core base, which has stayed solid. But then when the high tourist season comes, a lot of people can't make it out to the services.
Tenemos un programa de radio que lo llevamos adelante muy extenso.
We have a radio program, an extensive radio program and ministry that we are carrying on with.
En el trabajo solo,
I work alone in that ministry.
martes y viernes de 4 p.m. a 5 p.m.
Tuesday and Friday from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m.
Por momentos tomo escritos de Juan Samuel Bunstra y los amplío o hablo sobre ellos.
A lot of times I'll take the writings of Juan Boonstra and I'll read them on the radio program or I'll elaborate on them in the radio program.
Pero la mayoría son los que yo tengo que preparar para llenar el espacio de 1 hora donde hay solamente 2 canciones y nada más.
So I use that to help fill up for the content for this hour that I have, where I'll only put 2 songs on during the hour.
¿Puedo decir cómo presentamos la radio? Okay.
So he's going to say how he starts out the radio program.
Esta es la voz de la Iglesia de la Gracia, Monte de Luz.
This is the voice of the Church of Grace, Mountain of Light.
Anunciamos a Dios acercándose al hombre para salvarlo.
We proclaim God coming to men to save him.
La Iglesia de la Gracia proclama el Evangelio de Cristo. Anunciamos a Cristo y a este crucificado.
The Church of Grace, Mountain of Light, proclaims Christ and Christ crucified.
Muchas veces hay llamados telefónicos y otras silencio, pero no callamos, predicamos, la obra es de Dios.
A lot of times people will call in during the show and we'll respond to those, but other times we won't hear anything and we'll just continue on preaching the gospel.
Una gran parte de la iglesia que la componen vinieron a través del programa de la radio.
A lot of the people who are part of our church have come to the church through the radio program.
El programa va en una radio secular porque de esa manera podemos llegar a la gente inconversa.
We buy time on the secular radio station so that we can reach unconverted people.
Y por ello es que ha llegado mucha gente a la iglesia.
And that's why a lot of people have come into the church.
Pero además de eso, tenemos unos pocos jóvenes en la iglesia tanto mujeres como hombres, pero lo que menos hay es hombres.
And so we have some young people in the church, both young men and women, but there aren't very many young men in the church.
Yo soy el que pastorea y tenemos 2 diáconos y uno de ellos solamente da un sermón por mes.
Okay, I'm the pastor, and we have 2 deacons, and one of the deacons preaches once a month.
Tenemos grandes esperanzas y grandes proyectos y vamos a relacionarnos con una iglesia nueva en la doctrina de la gracia que está a 15 minutos de Carlos Paz.
So we have a lot of projects planned, upcoming projects planned, and we have a lot of expectation for what God will do in the coming days. And we're beginning a relationship with a church that's in a town about 15 minutes away from Carlos Paz, it's a church that is beginning to preach the doctrines of grace.
La importancia de la literatura. Este pastor recibió un libro con la confesión de fe hace 11 años y se comunicó con nosotros para decirnos que estaba enseñando en su iglesia.
The importance, we really see the importance of literature. This pastor, that's the pastor of this church in the other town, 11 years ago received a book that had the confession of faith in it, and he got in contact with us after several years.
Okay. Sí.
So if we can set the pictures up for the Argentina, I think it was 03, I think was there it is.
Esta es la ciudad de Carlos Paz,
This is the city of Carlos Paz.
una ciudad con mucho turismo
It's a city with a lot of tourism
y mucho libertinaje.
and a lot of license, immoral license.
Estos son los 2 diáconos.
These are the 2 deacons with me.
Ellos hacen aperturas en los servicios y el de abajo es el que predica una vez al mes.
And both of them will give the welcome and the announcements in the service. And the one that's on the bottom right is the one that will preach once a month.
Alejandro Catalano
His name is Alejandro.
Y Rodolfo Salazar.
And in the middle is Rodolfo. I'm sorry, Alejandro is in the middle and Rodolfo is on the right.
Okay. Esta es la reunión de damas, la de abajo. Es la reunión de damas.
The picture on the bottom left is the ladies' meeting.
Los sábados de por medio.
They have their, every other Saturday they have their meeting.
Y ellos son los varones que tenemos un estudio bíblico.
And that's the men's Bible study up on the top right.
Ello es una reunión de damas y como ellas se gozan y en la reunión de adolescentes.
On the top left is the women's meeting, and on the bottom right is the youth meeting.
Yeah. Nada más. Esa es una radio muy humilde, pero que llega muy lejos de la ciudad.
The radio station is a very kind of impoverished radio station, but it has a very far reach from the city.
Y ahí la iglesia de la Gracia Monte de Luz.
And this is our church, the Church of Grace, Mountain of Light.
Eso es todo lo que tenía que decir. Y muchas gracias por sus bendiciones y sus oraciones. Gracias.
This is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for your blessings, for the way that you blessed us, and for your prayers. Thank you very much.
As you can tell, Jorge has a voice for radio. I've always been told that I have a face for radio, and it is a privilege for us to see what God is doing in all these amazing places. What's happening now with our son David with POIEMA Publishing is almost like for us a dream of seeing what God is doing. We're surprised by what's happening. It's not like here's a plan, but as we watched 40 plus years ago and 50 years ago as the Banner of Truth began to have such a ministry among us, we believe that what's happening with literature in Latin America is an important part of that reformation that we're praying for in these churches. And our son David, I believe from the time he was 2 and 3 years old, had something of his love for praying for revival and those kind of issues that we believe so strongly in. So I don't think I could have greater joy than to see what God's doing with him in the whole area of literature and publishing. So if David would come and speak to us.
Okay. I think if you can, I think we're back on again. Okay, yeah. So there's the final presentation. I think it's 04. If you can put up. Yeah. So this is the first time I've had the opportunity to speak with you guys about the work that I'm doing in Colombia. And I moved to Medellin 11 years ago. I felt called back to Colombia. I was born when my parents were on the mission field there. And I think I maybe mentioned in the video, I'm very thankful for the ministries and the churches who supported my parents even then. I think some are represented here now. And just thinking of the impact, I remember, I don't remember it, but they told me about it, that when I was 2 months old, I needed a brain surgery or a skull surgery, I guess. And my skull was fused together. And it was one of the churches, it was Grace Baptist Church in Carlisle, that the members came together and said that they were going to pay for that surgery. And I've seen later in Latin America, in both Colombia and in Peru, I've run across people who didn't have that surgery, and their skulls are this size, and of course you can imagine the implications there. So I just wanted to reiterate again my thanks for the support and just to encourage all of you in the way that you're holding the rope for so many missionaries. So I moved back to Colombia, not exactly sure what God's plan was for how I could best serve him there. I came to the conclusion after college that I was not called to be a pastor, which I don't see anybody tackling me here yet, but to get me off the stage. But I definitely have wrestled with that issue and felt that I'm not called to be a pastor. So when I moved back to Colombia, I did an MBA program to get connected to the business culture there, and then struggled for a couple of years to try to figure out where exactly how God could use me for his kingdom in Colombia. And it was about 6 years ago that he began to open doors. Really, it started with helping my dad with some of the projects that he had been translating going back 45 years into Spanish. But we kept seeing the issue that there wasn't very good distribution, and that a lot of these books that would get translated would just sit on a shelf somewhere. So I think it was when Ted Tripp was going to go down with my dad and mom to about 4 different cities, I think, about 6 years ago, that we saw a need for a new edition of Ted's book. And so POIEMA was an idea that I had been talking to them about, of a publishing company that could really focus on getting the books out and getting good distribution. So I want to just do a quick overview of Medellin, where I am, and the churches the church that I'm a member of is part of a group of churches that 11 years ago when I got there, the founding pastor would tell you that they were really in the wilderness, that they were preaching a therapeutic gospel, that that basically they were lost in the wilderness. And so through a lot of different things that God used, through good books, through just going to conferences, through the influence of my dad, these churches have been in a process of reformation over these last 11 years. And so I just wanted to tell you quickly about Medellin and some of the things that are going on there. You can see where Colombia is. I know that a lot of you know all these things, but for those of you that don't know it well, Colombia is the only country in South America that has both Pacific and Atlantic coast. So it's kind of a strategic location in terms of what we're trying to do and trying to travel and trying to get books all over Latin America. The city of Medellin is 3.5 million people, and probably a lot of you know the name Medellin from the drug cartels that were so rampant there in the 80s and 90s and the violence. And I can tell you more about the situation in Colombia if you'd like to at some point over dinner or something like that. While we have seen a growth of quote-unquote Christian churches, evangelical churches, Roman Catholicism is still very strong, and it's a superstitious Roman Catholicism. So this is about 500 yards from my apartment, from my condominium, which is in a very nice part of town. And there's a up here you can see there's a Virgin Mary that people just flock to. And this particular virgin was a virgin statue or a shrine that the hitmen that had to do with the Medellin cartel who would go and do their hits, they would come here to pray over their hit that they were going to go do to do their rituals to seek blessing for their hit. So there's a real sense there's a saying in Colombia that el que peca y reza empata, and it's basically he who sins and goes to confession breaks even. So there's this real sense, it's a nominal thing, but you'll be amazed. You'll just be going on a bus with people and suddenly everybody starts crossing themselves and you have to look around and figure out where we passed either a shrine or a church or something. People are very superstitious. So in the midst of that, the Redil churches, there were 4 churches when I moved there 11 years ago, and they're churches that are very excited about planting new churches and about evangelizing, and it's a great thing that I've learned so much from them through these years. And so you can see there we went from 4 churches, and we've planted several churches from our church over these last 11 years. So now there are 14 churches, and you can see that we don't have good spaces. This is a house that we rented for several years and knocked down several walls, and so we're kind of everybody's jammed in there for the services. This is the church that I'm a member of, and the other 13 churches are of similar size. Diego Cardona is a member. He's the one on the left here. He is a member of our board of POIEMA. He was the son of a friend of my dad's going back 45 years or something. And Diego wrote to my dad when they got back in contact after several years and told him that he had become a Christian through some conferences, that he had come to faith through some conferences the very last week that my family was in Colombia before coming back to the States. So Diego is my pastor, and he's like a family member for us. But he's the one that will tell you that 11 years ago these churches were in the wilderness. Carlos Mendivelso is the lead pastor of one of the other churches, the largest church in the network. Jairo Suarez just began a church plant with Diego it's been 5 years ago now, And that church has seen real growth. They are, I think, on a Sunday morning, they have around 400 people who are coming to the services. Ronald Orozco was really the only one when I first went to Medellin who I could talk with about the doctrines of grace. And Diego had a history with that, but really he had kind of left those things. He had kind of ignored those things. And Ronald was the young man who believed in the doctrines of grace and who we prayed together. And he's now just started a church plant about a year ago. And that church is, I think, about around 100 people now. So we're seeing just real growth. And they're not just people, it's not sheep stealing. It's not just people coming from other places, but these are people that invite their friends and they basically say to them, come and see what the gospel. Jonathan Calle, here on the left, he has been sent from our church to replant a church that we had tried to plant about 9 years ago, and it just never really got off the ground. And so we're trying to replant that church. He has gotten really excited about the doctrines of grace through Edwin Palmer's book, The 5 Points of Calvinism, which my dad worked on getting books all over Latin America of that book, and it was through that book that he came to see the doctrines of grace, and he'll be one that will tell you that he doesn't know if he was really a Christian before he understood these things. He's a big fan of Paul Tripp's now, and he uses a lot of Paul Tripp stuff in counseling. God's given him a real heart for counseling. This guy here was the first employee that I brought on with POIEMA, Andres Bermudez. His story of his life being transformed after wanting to join the FARC, the guerrilla rebels, and really being he's seeing his life transformed by the gospel. He's now this was his wedding day. He married Catalina, and they are now studying in Argentina, and he's now getting books out in Argentina. Some of the books that we're publishing. So it's exciting. I just wanted to show you some faces of the people that we work closely with. This is a group in Medellin that we started from our church that's called Faith and Vocation. One of the things that when we talk about the gospel, about the Reformation never coming to Latin America, one of the things that's so important is an understanding of vocation. And so a lot of the people that come into evangelical churches, they'll still continue on with this Roman Catholic dualism, that basically the priest is the one who has the real connection with God, and that the regular Christian has the permitted life. If you think about some of the medieval theologians that talked about this permitted life. And so really, that affects so much of what they do, is because church, their faith is just something for Sunday, and they'll go and they'll get all crazy on Sunday and really leave feeling like they just had this great experience. But then they go to work on Monday and they're running corrupt businesses, and they're people that are in the church on Sunday dancing around, and I don't remember who was talking about waving the flags around and everything and all kinds of stuff, but it doesn't have an effect on Monday through Saturday. And so one of the things that I really think lifted Europe out of poverty was an understanding of work as worship, and seeing that God has demands on every corner of their life. So this was a group that we started, Faith and Vocation, which several business people, I could go through and tell you all the different sectors of the city that these people are working in, and we've really seen God use this to stop corruption in several different places, to denounce corruption in the city, and we've just seen a lot of transformation through this group. This was kind of a high point of seeing how God has brought these groups of churches along. This was at the Gospel Coalition Conference in Orlando, which there was a Spanish language pre-conference, and all these people paid for they saved up their money and went, and we had a big group from Medellin that went to this conference, and just to see people coming from 11 years ago of being involved in all kinds of just really unhealthy Christianity, if you would even call it that, to being excited about the doctrines of grace, to being taught at the Gospel Coalition Conference. So now to go a little bit more into detail about the work that I do, POIEMA is that word that Paul uses in Ephesians 2 for we are his workmanship, handiwork. That's the POIEMA word, and it really talks about a work of art and almost a masterpiece. And the word in Spanish doesn't really capture that, and so it was a word that in a lot of ways we want to be imaging God's work, the work that he does through our work. And the lema, the slogan, motto, I guess, is the gospel for every corner of life. I was just talking about the importance of God's demands on every aspect of our lives and on every aspect of creation. And if that makes you think, if that makes you remember that quote by Abraham Kuyper on Christ claiming every square inch of his creation, that's the intention. So just to talk quickly about some of the book reach, I know that some of you may have heard this before. I think Pastor Neuheiser is here. Pastor Neuheiser has a book called Help, I Want to Change. And so one morning, Santiago, who works with us, had his, on Fridays, they can, in our office, it'll be kind of a halfway casual day, so we don't have to wear office clothes, but he has a POIEMA shirt. And so he was wearing that on a Friday. And the metro, right here in this picture, the metro system is kind of empty. On a morning commute to work, I'm sure you've seen the videos in Asia where they just jam people in, and a lot of times you get stuck kind of halfway in the middle of the door. It's jam-packed. And one Friday morning, he's coming into work, and some guy taps him on the shoulder and saw something on his shirt. I saw his shirt, it said POIEMA on it. And he said, hey, those are Christian books, right? And this is all in Spanish, but I'll spare you the translation. And he said, yeah, how did you know that? And so he started telling this story, and they started talking, jammed up against each other like this, and they had to get off the metro so that they could talk. And the guy started telling him his testimony about how he had been widowed. His wife, he was about a 35-year-old guy, and his wife had died a couple years earlier, and he had really gone into drinking and to immorality. And his mom was concerned about him, and she sent him with some money to go buy a Bible. And he bought the Bible, but he said he had a little bit of money left over, and he found Jim Neuheiser's book, Help, I Want to Change, that we had published. And so he said, it was cheap, and so I picked it up. And he said, it took me 2 weeks to go through it. If you see it, it's 64 pages. It's pretty small. But he said it took him 2 weeks to go through it. And he said, that was 6 months ago. And he said, I understood the gospel. And he said, my life is completely changed from this. And so it was such an encouragement just how God had put him next to Santiago there at that time. We like to think that it happened because, that came together because there's so many people who are being impacted by our books that it was just bound to happen. But it's just encouraging to see how books can be used in people's lives. This is a picture from this morning of our office. We are getting, we've been for the last 6 years in the church building in a small room that's probably about from this first pew to about here, and it's a square. And the church where we are, that I'm a member of, just was able to buy a small property, and there's not space for us. So we have, when I get back on Saturday night or on Saturday afternoon, we're going to be pulling boxes out of there, and we still have not found where we're going to end up yet. So that can be a motive for prayer. This is Julian, who's working typesetting a study Bible that we're working on. We're working on a study Bible with Reformation Heritage books and also the Ligonier Reformation Study Bible in 2 different versions of the Spanish Scriptures. That's right. It has the Reformation Study Bible from Ligonier is going to have the 1689 in the back of in the notes in the back. This is half of the office, and this is the other half of the office. You can see this first picture is taken up at an angle, and that's because they were up on these stairs over here to the left. So it's pretty tight quarters, and if anybody gets a phone call, everybody else in the room knows exactly what's being talked about. That's kind of the team that's there when I'm not there, and so this is Gladys, Julian, Santiago, and Catherine, and you can see kind of a picture in the back there. That picture we have Ephesians 3:8 that I think Mark Dever quoted last night to remind us of this real privilege and responsibility and the grace that God's given us to be able to preach the gospel through these books to all of these countries. So you can kind of see an extension. Of course, there's a huge Spanish-speaking population in the U.S. I was just talking to everyone at the table where I was last night and asking them about how much we had people from Michigan and Wyoming. I mean, Michigan is about as north as you can, pretty close to as north as you can get. And there's a large Hispanic population there. I would think that probably most of you have Hispanic populations in the cities where you are. And if you don't know how to reach out to them, books are a really good way because they can speak the language that maybe you can't. So one of the things that we're involved in is hosting conferences. So this year, I've traveled with Ted we set up conferences in Monterrey, Mexico, in Mexico City, in Lima, in Santiago, Chile, in Bogota, and Medellin. This is the conference in Bogota, and I would say an average number that we had in these conferences were about 1,000 people. One of the things that's really neat about Ted's book is that people know they need help raising their kids. And Ted's book doesn't say this is the reformed way to raise your kids that would scare people off. It's just shepherding a child's heart. And it's amazing to hear how many people have told me over these years how Ted's book really transformed their understanding of the gospel, not just helped them with their kids. So many people say it helped them raising their kids, but so many say, I had a pastor in Mexico a couple months ago. He told me, I was in seminary, I wasn't married, and I didn't have kids, and they made us read that book. And he said, I'm not sure if I understood the gospel before I read that book. So that's one of the exciting things about doing these conferences with Ted. And we get to go into really crazy places. So this is a church, I think at this conference we had 1,800 people. It's pretty straight up prosperity gospel type place, but they give us an open door to go in and take Ted there, and Ted preaches the gospel, and it's powerful, and we see people shaken up afterwards, and people coming to us afterwards and saying, this is different than anything I had ever heard or seen before. You can be praying. We've got an opportunity to be next year in a church in Bogota that has, on a Sunday, between all the different services they have, I think they have about 10,000 people that come through there. And they have been calling me like crazy because they want to set up this conference with Ted to be there. And the head pastor is going to be doing the translating. So it's a real opportunity. So you can be praying for those things. One of the things that I do is when I'm in these different cities, whether it's to a conference or through another event, I will go around to all the different bookstores, and I'll set up kind of like what I used to do when I was a project manager in construction. I do like a job site talk. So I'll set up with the manager an hour before they open, and I'll take them donuts or facturas in Argentina or whatever their local breakfast pastry is, and I'll take some and some coffee, and I get to talk to him about our books for an hour. And so we set up some videos, and we set up all different kinds of things to make it a little bit more exciting than this is. It's so exciting because since our books are centered on the gospel, I have an opportunity to go into these places where they're selling Joel Osteen, and he'd probably be one of the heavier theologians for some of these bookstores. And I get to talk to these people who want to serve God, and I get to talk to them about the gospel. And it's so exciting. And so now, having been able to do this for several years and going back to the same places, they get excited when I come, and they say, oh, I read this book, and oh, we read this book, and oh, now I'm recommending this one to all the people that come in. And so it's a neat opportunity. We also get to be involved in other conferences. So I don't want to give the impression that, oh, we're doing all this great stuff. We're just trying to provide resources for what God has been doing and what God is doing. So there are other conferences that we piggyback onto, and we show up for. This was a conference I was in last week in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So I stayed with a friend of my dad's from 45 years ago, and who had the book stall there, and he's got all our books, and he's got a bunch of Wayne Anderson's books there too. And the story of this church is really neat. This was a prosperity gospel church that they built this huge, beautiful building. This is a beautiful building, but this place where we were, it was just finished in 2014, and it was state-of-the-art everything, and we're in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And they finished this building, and a couple months into it, the pastor got up in front of them, and he said, and this is 2 services of 1,200 people a service, and he got up to him and he said, I need to repent, and I need to ask for all of your forgiveness, because for the last 17 years, I've been preaching a lie. I've been preaching a gospel that's not a gospel. He was a prosperity gospel preacher, and he said, from now on, we're going to be preaching expository preaching, and he began to preach from the book of John, and it took him the whole year, and it's just really neat to see what God's doing. So keep praying for Latin America. We did a book launch there with Miguel Nunez. This book is called The Power of God's Word to Transform a Nation. And he talks about that Latin America really has never been transformed by the gospel, and that really it's a great presentation of the gospel, and it's a call for pastors to do what I just talked about this pastor in Puerto Rico doing. And this was Miguel Nunez's doctoral project at Southern Seminary, and it has a chapter of saying, let's look at the example of the U.S. In the last years as a real warning to us as well. One of the other things that we do is I go to these like Christian book distributor types events. This was Expo Lead. It happens in Miami every year. This was the stand that we set up. One of the first year that I went to Expo Lead, it's just crazy. There's Diego Cardona, who's one of the board member, that's the pastor that I told you about. He told me that he knows that one of the ministries he actually thinks is actually involved in witchcraft. There was another guy who was walking down the aisles of this quote-unquote Christian event with his shirt off and a white boa constrictor, a live boa constrictor, and he was walking around, and I didn't even ask him what ministry it was, but it's a circus. And so to be able to have, I understand, you see Tim Keller there. I understand probably not everybody would agree with Tim Keller on every single thing, but he presents the gospel, and to hear church planners using, I was just with church planners last week, then they're using Galatians for You as the first Bible study, small group study that they're doing with their people, and just going through Galatians and the importance of the gospel. Here's the book I was looking for from Jim Neuheiser a while back. So this was another event that we had in Mexico. It's a Christian book distributor event in Mexico, and this is kind of I think this is the last slide here. This is kind of a neat. We try to take advantage of every opportunity. So they charge everything. They charge money for every little participation that you want to have here, and we try to make things stretch. But we got to the event, and somehow or another they hadn't set up. People had paid a whole bunch of money for these 2 spots, for the publicity spots, and somehow or another the stuff hadn't come. Their supplier didn't bring the stuff, and so a couple hours went by, and I said, hey, could we stick something up there? I mean, it's just blank. And so they said, well, I don't think you'd have time to do that. And so I ran down and went to the print shop and got these printed up. So it's an exciting job, but it's a lot of fun to be able to just try to take advantage of every opportunity and doors that God just opens on a regular basis. So I really want to thank you for your prayers for us, and to ask you to continue to pray for us. You can pray that God would continue to bring new conversions through our books, through church plants, that church planters are using our books all over Latin America. And evangelistic Bible studies are a real opportunity in Latin America. And that the Reformation that's going on would be a healthy Reformation. So we've seen tendencies towards hyper-Calvinism, towards cutting each other up with knives, and you don't sing this song exactly the way you're supposed to sing it, and so you're not really Reformed and this kind of stuff. So pray for a healthy Reformation in Latin America. Continue to pray for open doors in the bookstores. God's given us grace, but there's still countries that are really hard to get books into. Pray for a location for us. Like I said, I've been texting all day. They're showing me pictures of places that they're trying to go and look and see if we might be able to go into this spot or another. But long term, what we'd like to do, we'd like to just be in a place for a year now, and we'd really like to be able to buy a place where we could have a Christian bookstore. Medellin doesn't have a visible Christian bookstore for the 3.5 million people. There are a couple bookstores that are kind of tucked away back into some place, but we'd really like to see a bookstore that could be there for the next 30 years, and that people could, when they go through a divorce or something, they could go buy it for 20 years or for a couple of years and think, I'll never go in there. But they go through a rough divorce, or somebody dies in their family, and they know there's a place where they can look for hope. Just as I was talking to the people at the table last night, I realized there's a lot of real needs in a lot of communities where a lot of you are and where your churches are. And so pray for the Spanish speakers in your communities, because they more than likely, and who knows if with these immigration changes, the diaspora, what happened after Jerusalem and the persecution in Jerusalem may happen in some sense through the immigration laws and that kind of stuff. I was just talking to a church planter last week, and he said 65% he's in Oklahoma, and he said 65% of their Spanish-speaking church would have to leave if the immigration laws were put through. So look at it as a mission opportunity with the Spanish speakers in your neighborhoods, and I can tell you about really good books that would be great to be able to give to people. So thank you for the time, and thank you for your prayers.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Jorge. Pastor Bob Self wants to come and say a closing word. And Bob, if you would also pray for these requests and give thanks for the food we're about to receive. And then we'll go to something.
Good deal. First, a word about Jorge. I love this brother. His son and my son both married daughters of Don Donnell. So we're kind of related. The first time I met him, Don had me teach in the church in Carlos Paz on the validity and the importance of using confessions of faith. By the time I finished, he had tears coming down his face because he's believed that, but he couldn't find anywhere in all his experience where that was done in the church. He loves a confession of faith, and what a faithful brother he is. Concerning David, I don't know if you understand what he just showed you and what is happening in Latin America and the open doors of what is happening. I just want to try to help make it a little more clear. Jim Adams has shared with us several times about his son's work. But Jim, I'm not sure, has been real clear about the money part of it, the need. So I'm just going to be brave and say something about that. If David were to write to Cornerstone Church in Mesa, he could quote Philippians 4 and say to Cornerstone, "No church has communicated to me concerning giving and receiving except you only." In other words, there's no one supporting David Adams in that work that he's doing in Latin America other than his dad's church in Arizona. And I'm just telling you, I believe in what he's doing big time. I know all our other missionaries there's financial needs, and they're important, and they're valid. And I hope God will provide. But I'm just going to be an advocate for David in this moment. And I'll be glad to be an advocate for anybody else that needs help. But when you think of what God has done in our own country in this whole Reformation and revival thing, Jim mentioned Banner of Truth. It was through literature and conferences. Literature and conferences. And that's how God used John Piper. Literature and conferences. How many of you have met folks that have come to the Reformed faith largely because of John Piper's books? And John MacArthur and R.C. Sproul and the Southern Baptist Founders Conference. Literature and conferences. And other brothers, Steve, you're going to Russia. Literature and conferences. And others, David Merrick and others, literature and conferences. And it's so vital to get these books written in these indigenous languages in the hands of the people. I'm just saying, this work that David is doing, he's uniquely gifted David, not only with his family and background, but in other types of experience and training that he's received, to be able to go into bookstores and deal with businessmen, to go to churches, to go to conferences, and it's incredible, this open door. So I would just encourage all of us, as churches and individuals, to pray and see if we might be able to turn that around, that Philippians 4 thing, where it's not just Dad's church that's supporting his son, but that a bunch of our churches just might be willing to give $50 a month, 25 or 100. Just there's great needs because there's great doors of opportunity. So I just want to lay that on our hearts. Now let's pray. Our Father, you are raising up laborers to be thrust out into the harvest. We're seeing them and it thrills our hearts. You're answering our prayers. And I'm reminded of one David K. Straub and the burden of his heart, the cry among us for years, where are the laborers? And we have this week set before us 17 plus laborers that have a passion and burden for the nations to carry the gospel to people of all types around the world. And you're doing an amazing thing, and we are humbled and we bow and give you glory. So Father, we pray for your provision for David and the work that he's doing, his selfless sacrifice and his energies that just go on and on, all through Latin America and around the world. We pray that you would help our brother and strengthen him and sustain him, help him in his singleness. Would you keep him? Would you have your hand to guard his heart and soul and make him an even more useful instrument in the hands of our King? And we pray that for all our missionaries. Father, not only send the laborers, but send the Spirit and bless them, powerfully bless them. As we eat this food, we pray for your blessing on our bodies, but Truly, Father, that we'd see that food is coming from your hand to ours, that you are our God. And we offer to you praise through Jesus Christ. Amen.